afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Oh my goodness, we never expected this many people. Thank you all for coming. My name is Joyce Moulter, and I have the honor of being the acting president, the current president of the CIO Museum. About 6 months ago, Pat and Caitlin Hafford came to us and said, this is the 62nd anniversary of the storm of 62, and we have a program that we would like to put together. So for the last 6 months, if you came into our museum on a Friday afternoon, you would see Pat and Caitlin at our big conference table with the storm books out, pictures, Caitlin with her trusty iPad taking notes, Pat reminiscing sometimes off subject. But this is the culmination of that wonderful work that they have been doing. Today's program is a little bit different because it's not just about the storm of 62. It's about this, how the people of this town, this small town, which when you think about it, in March, it was a really small town,
Even smaller.
came together and helped one another through the tragedy. And then when it was done, together with the city and all of the people, got together and cleaned up and helped each other and rebuilt this so that we have this beautiful town that we have today. My husband and I have only been in this town full time for 12 years. We've owned our house a little bit longer than that. I don't think I've ever lived anywhere where I've felt such a sense of community as you do in CIO. I know more people than I've ever known anywhere, and someone's always there to help you. And that's what these people were in 1962, and it's what they are still today. Just in closing, I want to reach out and that sense of community. My volunteers have been working hard to get this together for us today, putting up the chairs, which we obviously didn't have enough of, and just getting all these displays together. I mean, everyone has been so helpful. I need to send a special thanks out to Abby Powell, who I think slept at the museum for the last 2 weeks. She has worked so hard. She's kind of responsible. Caitlin and Pat got the pictures out, and Abby found out how to put them together. So we really welcome to today, and thank you for coming, and we hope you enjoy the show. And I would like to introduce Lenny Desiderio. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Let me be the first to say happy St. Patty's Day to y'all. Wow, what a crowd. What a crowd. You know what I think we'll do? I think we'll build a community center so we can have events like this. What do you think?
Rent the Mac.
You gotta come up with these good ideas every once in a while. And this is a good one. But it's so great to see so many people here. And I'm looking out and I see so many people that were actually here in 1962. Although I was here when I was a baby, I was not here during the storm of 1962. But I know of many people that were here, including my wife and her family who had to be flown out during the 62 storm. And they were taken to Woodbine to stay with friends. And then after the storm, they came back and did what all CIO did, work together to rebuild the community. My wife was only about 1.5 years. She's actually 7 years older than me. So,
That wasn't nice.
she's not here, so I can But what happened in the 62 storm transformed our entire community. It changed the landscape, it changed, and you're going to hear from speakers today that are going to be absolutely amazing, because I've heard many of the stories. And no matter what you guys think, I was not the mayor in 1962. All right, but see how work together, and as we always do, work together to come together to rebuild the community. And after the Superstorm Sandy, we didn't have a storm like that. North of us got hit far worse. But we copied some of the ideas that the town fathers did after the 62 storm. And we had to alert everyone, hey, Seal is here, we're okay, and we're open. Of course, we were able to do it in different manners than they were able to do in 1962. You know, by social media, by billboards. We had a billboard coming out of the Lincoln Tunnel in New York City that stated, hey, we're ready, we're open. Because many people thought that Seaside, which got hit pretty hard, and that Ferris wheel and roller coaster that was hanging in the water, they put it with Sea Isle City. So we did many of the things that was done after the 62 storm. But things have remained constant here in Seattle. The community people come together when needed to work together for the betterment of our community. Give yourselves a round of applause, because you have been doing this for decades, and you'll continue to do this. So I want to thank Caitlin and Pat. And I know Dr. Joe LaRose is here today, and he's written some books that are amazing. You're gonna hear stories, and you're gonna hear stories from some of the people in the audience, because I'm looking out and many of you were here. You know, they always think that there's only about 6 of us running around during the month of January in Seattle, but there are many of us, and I'm happy to see you all here. Thank you to the Historical Society for sponsoring this, and thank you all for taking the time to come out today to learn a little bit more about our history. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you, Mayor. Hi, my name's Joe LaRosa, and I am a storm survivor. It is, I'm going to explain the word survivor, but this is really cramped. If I start droning on, if things get boring, it's going to be hot. Give me a thumbs down, all right? Because I'll be able to read the crowd a little bit better. So just kind of bear with me. I am a storm survivor, and I use the word survivor because I looked it up in the dictionary. And survivor is someone who has been through something horrible. And at the time, I was a little kid. I was 9 years old. I didn't think it was all that horrible. I was young. I mean, I got a helicopter ride out of it. So it was cool. And I'll even touch that when we came back into town. That was even better. But after Superstorm Sandy, my wife and I went up to Monmouth County, and I looked at the houses, and they were upside down, undersides on the meadows. And it came back to me like a punch, and it hit me. It hit me really hard that as a community, we had been through a lot. Now, at the time when I did this, I never thought much about it. And after it had happened, I knew I had to put it down someplace. So let me talk about Sea Isle City just to begin. Picture Sea Isle City today in your mind's eye, and then make your mind's eye blank, because Sea Isle City was a totally different community back then. Central Avenue stopped at the football field. That was the end of the island. It went gravel to then, and then it went into the meadows. And it picked up again around 79th Street. I don't know for sure. And that was Townsend's Inlet. Townsend's Inlet was, for all intent and purpose, a separate community under Sea Isle City, of course. Going north, for all intent and purposes, town stopped at 39th Street. Central Avenue went down into the meadows, and there was a phone pole line going to the lighthouse on 29th Street with an osprey nest on it, actually. But that was all meadows from 39th Street north and probably from the football field, going south. There were two roads going the length of the one road going the length of the island, but Pleasure Avenue picked up around 28th Street by the lighthouse. And it went all the way up. Now, does anybody live on Pleasure Avenue, drive on Pleasure Avenue? You see how it goes like this? It used to go around sand dunes, okay? And the reason it goes is because that's where the sand dune was. They just paved over top of the road and the sand dune was there. So that is why Pleasure Avenue is the way Pleasure Avenue is. Landis Avenue went the whole length of the island. Between Landis and Pleasure, there were meadows. There were meadows on the other side of Landis. But they had built the Acme Shopping Center, okay? That was there. And that was, the town was very small. There was about 1,300 year-round residents. But it was a very thriving community. We had 2 schools. We had 3 churches, all well maintained, all attended. The core of the town, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, were the veterans who served in World War II. They were doing the Rotary, they were doing the American Legion, they were doing the VFW. They were the movers and shakers of the town. And they made this town the perfect place to grow up. It was just fantastic. And we had the beach. I thought everybody had the beach, But anyway, there was nothing built. And that was the town. So after the 62 storm, I was like 9 years old. But as I got older, I said, you know what? Somebody's got to put this down. They got to write about this. And I'm like, well, why not me? So I started writing and I started gathering. Now, I actually started gathering stuff in 1962, just so you know. It's everything in my head. My wife will tell you what the attic looks like. And I started putting everything together. And in and around 2008, 2009, we had 2 snowstorms back to back. And I sat up at the computer and I put all the pictures together and I finally got the first book. And the first book is called Storm Stories. It sounds like I'm selling books, but actually this book is out of print. As of last week, there was 1 book left at Dalrymple's. I don't know if it's still there. None at the Sands and whatever's on the table there. This is a historical documentation of the 62 storm with some stories set in. Everything has 2 sources. It was made for me to document 100 years from now. But when I was making the book, I had the opportunity to speak with all my friends' parents. I got to stay with the microphone. And I got stories, but there were 1 source. And as a historical document, I wanted everything to have 2 sources. So I didn't put them in. But I said, wow, I have a bunch of stories here that have to be heard. And when I retire, I'm going to put them again. And I finally did, and that's the second book. The difference between the first book and the second book is this has a yellow binding and different photograph on the front. And what it was I found out everyone has a story about the March 1962 storm. Now, the reason I was pretty good with everything that was happening is my father was the assistant superintendent of public works, and it was a way different time back then. So I would hop in the truck and drive around town with him. He had a water service call, and I was out of school or weekend. I hop in the truck, drive down the boardwalk. I was a man about Seattle. And one day in March of 1962, my childhood disappeared. Everything disappeared. And it was such, as a kid, you roll with it. But it was a really big deal. It was a very big deal. And I'm gonna explain. Now, my job today is to explain actually the nuts and bolts of the storm. And that's what I'm going to do. But first, I would like to ask every storm survivor that is here to stand up for a second and just so we can acknowledge it. So whoever was here in 62, if you can stand up, okay? And if you're standing up already, raise your hand. Okay. Stay standing for a second. Everyone else, take a look around and pick somebody. And after this is over, go up to them and talk and get their story. Because it is amazing what these people did. These are the people, we lived through it, but you know, I mean, we were little guys, but we were there to support our family. And my dad and my mom, they were the people who, you guys can sit down. I just make sure that everyone, you pick somebody out and you go talk to them, because everyone has a story. Now, the overriding, I got to stay on. Okay. I used to be an educator in the cafeteria. Can you tell? Knock it off. No, one thing absolutely overriding that you have to understand before you can understand anything else. Flood insurance was so cost prohibitive that no one had flood insurance. If you lost your house, you lost your house. If you lost your equipment to work, you lost your equipment to work. If you lost your tools, you lost your tools. There was no such thing as FEMA. The government did not come in and provide for all of us. What we relied on was each other. The self-reliance of my folks and everyone else's folks that were here is what built the town back up. So with every story that you hear and everything you hear, just remember, no one had insurance. And the government, President Carter started FEMA 12 years after the '62 storm. So just kind of focus what that was like. When you lost, you lost. Okay, what was the storm? Everyone says, oh my goodness, it was a hurricane. The storm was a northeast. Was anyone here last Saturday night? Okay. Times that by about 5 or 10 and give you 3 days of it. And that is a taste of what it was like in March of '62. It was cranking. What happened was there was a low pressure system that was coming across the United States, coming from the Midwest, dropped down south and went up the Shenandoah Valley. And it had record snowfall in the Shenandoah Valley in Western Virginia. In Iowa, it snowed so hard that a snowplow train got stuck. The train that went out after it got stuck. So that was the low pressure system that's cranking across the country. At the exact same time, down in Florida and off of the Carolinas and Georgia, there is another low pressure system. And that's your typical March northeast. And it's cranking up the coast. They met in Maryland and Delaware and combined and went forward. And they were going forward. And I'll talk about that in a bit. Again, if I start, and get up if it's too hot, okay? Because I can go forever. But they stalled. The system stalled off of sea island. Why? There was a gigantic high pressure system over the Arctic, and it stretched from the Arctic of Canada to Iceland to Greenland to England. And the low pressure system would bump, bump, it couldn't move. And it stalled for 3 days. So as I said, last Saturday night, 3 days of that. Now, also adding, and I call it the perfect storm, is apogee perigee, okay? We were having a spring perigean, if I say it right, tide, which means that the moon was closest to the earth. And that has a really strong effect on the currents, and especially on the tides. So we had more water than usual. So the low pressure system, the tide, everything formed up, and we had ourselves a 3-day perfect storm. So it was 6 tide cycles. By that I mean high tide, low tide, high tide, low tide. So on day 1, we came up and the tide was high. Okay, well, that's no big deal. Tide's always high, you know, see how the roads were flooded. But this was a little bit different, okay? What happened was there was a little bit more water than usual. And we woke up and it was like the first thing, I'm a kid. And Pat's gonna say, no school. Come on. So we couldn't get to the school. But the day before, the night before, gave no indication. Now you have to remember, there was no satellites for weather.
Right.
So we didn't know anything about it. It was, we said northeast, okay, it's northeast, it'd be like last weekend, it was away a couple days. It was a beautiful day the day before. And as the day went on, it got a little cloudy. I mean, it was like today, a little cloudy. And then around dinner time, my brother was out playing basketball. It started sleeting and raining. Remember, get in, it's dinner time. Went to bed, no big deal. And then we woke up to the next day, we woke up to what we woke up to. I mean, we had been through so many of these Northeast before, there was no big deal. Now, the next day was Ash Wednesday, and a couple of the people that I do see here were altar boys, and they couldn't get to church to give out ashes the next morning. And if they're here, they will tell you when you talk to them. But it was Ash, Wednesday, it hit Wednesday, March 6th, it was Ash Wednesday. And the first tide came up, and it was a very heavy tide, and it started damaging the beachfront. And the first house was, I think, on 54th Street, Milano's house. 57th? And it got knocked down. Milano's house got knocked down. That's an interesting story. I don't know if Anthony is here. But to make a very long story short, again, I can go forever. To make a very long story short, Mr. Milano took his family out, his kids, I think he had 5 kids at the time, got him out, got him to the neighbor's house because the ocean was banging and banging against the house. And it just was not like it usually is. They forgot the dog. So then when Mr. Milano went through, now it's March, remember the water is probably about 35 degrees. Went through the water, got to the back steps, got the dog, grabbed the dog, carried the dog, now it's raining, went down the back steps. As he hit the ground, his house went right down.
Wow.
It was right behind him. So he lost everything that he had, except for his family and his kids. And again, if anyone knows Anthony, ask him about it. He'll be happy to tell you. But what was really bad about this was after the first tide, the tide goes down, right? Tide didn't go down. The tide stayed up, and we're like, whoa. Now you think about it, when it's high tide here and it's flooded, the meadows get flooded. Oh, by the way, anyone here that is not really born and raised here, they're not marshes, they're the meadows. The waterway, they're not lagoons, they're canals. Okay, just so you know. So if I'm honestly, so if I'm referring to the meadows, that's what I mean. I mean all the marshlands. The meadows completely filled up with water. So here comes the second tide at night, and at the second tide at night, it's raining and it's windy, and the house was shaking, just like last Saturday. Our house used to shake, but that's a whole different story. What happened between the two tides when the tide didn't go down is our utilities failed. With the street ends getting hit, the water pipes broken, they're gushing fresh water out into the ocean. They're also gushing sewage out, okay? The sewage plant. It's a whole different story, the sewage plant. Anyone know where that used to be? Ah, okay. Utility failed. The sewer system and the water system failed. The phone system failed. This was no cell phone. You had your landline, that was it.
Yeah.
So our electric got knocked out too. Now, some of the places in town thankfully had electric, and I'm gonna get that. Some of the places had electric, and again, we didn't know the scope of this thing yet. We didn't know the scope of it until after it was over. So we went to bed, and my father comes up. My father worked at the city. My father comes up in a dump truck in the middle of the night, and it is raining. It is just really, really. I'm not going to say it. It was really, really snotty. And I said, and we go to my Uncle Dan's house, 46th and Park. And he had electric. It was right across from the public school. He had electric and he had phone. So we get in the city truck and me and my brother, and all right, we're going to go scan Grace Knuckleman. Hey. So, all right, kids, get to bed. I went upstairs, fell asleep. I was in my cousin's bed. No big deal. My cousin was in college. So it was all right. I was doing okay. So go to bed and I wake up like normal. I go downstairs and there's probably 30, 40 people down there, okay? My Uncle Dan and Aunt Grace started our response already. They started taking in people to their house. Houses were cold, dark, no heat, no electric, no phone, no nothing. And he had that, so he opened his doors up to the community. And as I said, we were starting to think that this was a little bit different. Also, during the first day, just to focus things, the Coast Guard base was at 82nd Street, I suppose. I guess it's still there. The building's still there. And when there was an incident in town, fire, whatnot, the chief would dispatch a crew to go help fight fires or go direct traffic, or if there was a parade, the Coast Guard was very much a part of the community back then. So there was a fire reported, and how did the fire get reported? Run through the water, get the fire, okay? That's what it was, run through the water, okay? So word got to Chief Rochester that there was a fire at the hospital. The hospital was located, I've mentioned the hospital before. We had a hospital, 54-bed hospital, was at 59th and Lamus Avenue. I'm sorry I didn't address that before. There was a fire at the hospital, so he dispatches a crew. Well, their vehicle gets swamped in and around 77th Street. And they walk from 77th to 59th Street in 30-some degree water to go help fight the fire. They get there, and what happened is one of the maintenance men took an axe and he cut out everything that was on fire and fire extinguishers, and they took care of it. But now they're stuck. They can't get back. So that lets you know just how severe it was. It took 3.5 hours to get from 82nd Street to 59th Street with those guys. So I wake up and it's day 2. And by now we've had 24 hours of successes hard northeast. And it's starting to take a toll. Besides Milano's house, things started falling into the ocean. And that includes first the very end and then the entire Madeline Theater, which was theater at a pier at 42nd Street that went out into the ocean.
You got water and everything.
And then the boardwalk went. And then the things on the other side of the boardwalk started going. One of the things that went was the largest building in Seattle, which is the Excursion House. Everyone's familiar with the Excursion Park. That used to be where the Excursion House was. The Excursion House was a very big building. And it was built that was the end of the railroad line. I mean, I can go down a rabbit hole. The railroad is where the flowers on Kennedy Boulevard, that's the right of way. And it ended at the Excursion House right on the beach. The railroad interest built a giant building. And the board, it had the ground level, boardwalk level head stores. Second level was a full basketball court where we used to play basketball. I got a picture of Buddy Adams. One of the teams with Fred Ford. But above that was another floor, which was as big, but it was the world's biggest attic. Now it was owned by the American Legion Post, and the American Legion was very active, very, very active in the community. They did a lot of things. That's where our Halloween parade was. We would have a Halloween parties run by the Legion, and we'd dance around in our uniforms and stuff, and they picked the best ones. But it was a giant building. It got knocked down. Okay, so things really took notice, and people were realizing this is not the usual kind of storm. And the tide did not drop. It went down a little bit, but didn't drop. So by now the meadows are completely submerged. Not like when you drive out. Anybody ever had the experience of not seeing a couple of little reeds coming up?
Yeah.
Okay. And if you get off of our road and go towards Ludlam's Landing, that was the level of it, of the road. So it wasn't raised at all. So what happened at high tide was when the tide started to go out, it went right through the town, okay? So the ocean and the bay met. While this was happening, they had a bit of a low tide. And somebody tried to get, fill these couple school buses up that we had, fill them up with people to get them the hell off the island. And they got as far as the road, and the road was washed out. And they had to basically walk back in the water, men, women, and children. So that's very compelling stories. And I'm not pushing the book, but a lot of this is documented. Seriously, a lot of it is documented. So get the book, the museum or the library. You know, I'm not pushing the book, but these stories I don't want to get into, but they're very, very, very compelling. I'd like to point out, you know, another thing. My best friend growing up, Lenny Bonnet, you know, been around forever. His father, Butch Romano, I see Joe's here. Joe Romano worked at the Acme. And once the water touches the Acme, remember Superstorm Steve? Once it gets near the front door, they got to throw everything out. That includes the stuff this high up that they have to get a ladder to get, okay? Well, Mr. Bonnet knew this. So he and Butch and Joe knew about where the people were. You know, again, by now my Uncle Dan had about 60 people. And what I remember was they were bringing in garbage, clean, because the garbage cans, they were selling garbage cans, clean garbage cans full of food to us. And ladies being ladies, back then, especially in 1962, started cooking up, because we have to eat, right? Joseph, what do you want? Tasty cake. I still remember getting a tasty cake chocolate candy cake. I thought that was the greatest thing in the world. But anyway, that's how we ate. And of course, everything was canned because we had no water, but also we had no sewer. Now you get a house with 3 bathrooms or 3 toilets, 2 bathrooms, and 60 people, and the plumbing doesn't work. So you can imagine what my aunt was thinking, because without getting totally graphic, in your mind's eye, just figure out 60 people, 3 toilets, okay? No, that didn't flush, okay? Enough said. But that's what we were putting up with. The tides kept coming. The water didn't have time to head out. The tides kept coming, and they decided they were going to evacuate the island. Now, the first thing they had to do was evacuate the hospital, because obviously it was a hospital for sick people were. So they called the county emergency management, and they had helicopters coming in from the Coast Guard and from the Navy. And they set up, the Acme was actually there. I'm sorry, the American store, it's 1962, was there. And they had a landing zone set in the parking lot, and they evacuated, the firemen helped evacuate the hospital and get the people put away. And then they said, wow, this thing isn't going away. And they started evacuating the community. And I was still at my Uncle Dan's house. He had electric. I was watching Top Cat with Danny Town. Does anyone? I got breaks in here in case you're getting bored. Trivia: what was the #1 song in March 1962? March 6th. Huh? No. I'll give you a hint. It was by. Go ahead. Yes.
Mac the Knife.
No. It's by Gene Chandler. It was Duke of Earl. So as the 62 storm was happening, Duke of Earl was the #1 record. And it was knocked out of #1 the following week by Bruce Channel, Hey Baby. That's my radio, okay? I put myself in college with radio. And they're still playing Hey Baby live at football games, and it's like Sweet Caroline now. But anyway, #1 show, March 6th, 1962. Guess that one.
I love Louisiana.
Oh, Uncle Jed. Beverly Hillbillies. Okay. Back to my notes.
Yeah.
So on day 3, we started evacuating. And we had helicopters coming in. Now, the city had set up, emergency management, probably from the county, set up 3 landing zones in Seattle. One was where the foot of the bridge is now. You have to remember that the bridge at Kennedy Boulevard wasn't there. The bridge was at 44th Street. So right in front of the VFW, which was there was a landing zone for the helicopters. There was one at the parking lot of the Acme American store, and there was one at the Coast Guard base, that open area they were bringing, and everyone was told, word of mouth again, to go to these areas to get airlifted out. And you were allowed 1 suitcase. And that's all you were allowed. And it didn't matter who you were, what you were, you get 1 suitcase. But before that, as that was happening, as that was getting set up, the worst possible thing that could happen during an emergency happened in Seattle City. And there's no one left, but they were heroes. There was a fire at 45th between Landis and Central. It was a structure fire. There's no water, okay? The fire hydrants, they couldn't charge the hoses. But where is there water?
Everywhere.
And they dropped their hoses into the manholes,
Right.
sucked the water, the endless supply of water out of the manholes,
Right.
and controlled the fire. And there's no one left that would remember that. But I had the opportunity to speak with these people. And they're like, they get the fire trucks there and they're like, ah. While that was happening, we were getting evacuated. Now, there was still water everywhere. The tide was still up. So I was at my Uncle Dan's house. And I got to throw a little personal story in. My father worked for the city again. He comes up with a tractor, and the tractor had a bucket. And he gets the bucket, the tractor, he rolls up into my Uncle Dan's lawn, my Aunt Grace, I'll never forget him, and dropped the bucket on the porch. It was a concrete porch, like a stoop. My mom, my brother, and I step into the bucket to go home, to pack. He lifts the bucket up, hold on, backs up, and we drive down Park Road, and the bucket, raised bucket of a tractor through the water, gets to our house, my backyard, on 4302 Central, puts the bucket down, we jump to the steps, pack what we have to pack, jump back into the bucket of the truck, down, and by the time we got to a little past Mike's Fish Market, it was starting to dry out. He drops the bucket, and we get on the helicopter. So that was my story. So what happened? Okay, what happens once you get in the helicopter? The Ocean View Fire Department had set up a phone bank along with the American Red Cross, and the people of Ocean View and Woodbine were just as accommodating as possible. And we were let off at the Ocean View Firehouse. There was a phone bank where you can call whomever. I got a hold with my mom. We got a hold of our aunt in Port Richmond, and we arranged a ride with Eileen's sister Rosalie to get up there. So we get up there, and part of the trip we had to take by train, and then part of the trip we had to take by cab. So we get in the train, and the train lets us off. I think it was an L. That I didn't remember. I don't even saw a train. And we take a cab to my aunt's house. So the cabbie back then, if you ever see the old movies, that's what it was. My brother and I are in the back seat, my mom's in the front seat, and the cabbie's like, "Where are you guys from?" Because quite frankly, 3 days without a bath, hadn't really eaten, hadn't washed. We look like hell. Okay. And as soon as he heard we're from Seattle, now I get emotional. He's going, "You're what? You were what? You what?" And the guy's thunderstruck. My mom's telling the story. So pull up to my aunt's house. Doors open. Cabbie gets out, helps my mom out, gets the suitcase, gets that out. And those of you, I mean, there's a lot in the faces, but those of you who knew my mom, God bless her. So the door's shut, and the cabbie runs around and hops in the car. Alice LaRosa running down the street going, "Ah, ah." Cabbie took the money. So anyway. We came home, and I'm almost done, warning you guys, I apologize, we're almost done, and we come back to the Ocean View Fire Company, and they're busing us back in the CO. Now, everyone has to get a shot. Of what, I don't know, because after we were exploring, I stepped on a nail, and I got a tetanus shot, so I have no idea what kind of shot it was. Typhoid. Yeah, the adults knew, I was just there, so we would go into the back of the hospital, and Dr. Houck was one of the community doctors. He would hide behind the door. And anytime a kid came up, like me, I'm in the line to get a shot. And all of a sudden, like a bolt of lightning, this man comes up, boom, and I had my shot. Okay? So that was cool. So we go back to the house eventually, and we start rebuilding. And we're survivors now. What was interesting is we are a tourist-driven industry. Town was tourist-driven back then. It's March. By now it's the end of March, and we have to get our town back in order because it's bad getting your house knocked down, and it's bad getting your house damaged. But if you can't make any money, that's that's the wolf at the door, right? So, and where's Vin? Mayor Lamanna, and I hope if you see Vin Lamanna, Mayor Lamanna, his goal, oh, there he is. His goal was to get the town back. And he was the face of the recovery, Mayor Lamanna. And he did an unbelievable job because we were ready by 1962. Now, summer of 62, now like I tried to tell everyone, the other reason for that is the people, us that are still alive are baby boomers. The reason that the town got back so quickly, because the devastation was utter. And Pat will have some numbers for you, or they're up there, how many people, but virtually 100% of all the buildings in CL were damaged in one way or another. Over 285, I think, were gone completely. And about 1,200 had severe structural damage. Everyone had damage. But the people who were living here, our community, they were World War II veterans. And they said, our town got knocked down. All right, let's go. And they fixed it. They didn't have a trigger warning or whatnot. They just, all right, got knocked down. And the older generation, they were World War I veterans, and the younger generation were Korean War veterans. And they just said, all right, let's fix it. And again, no government assistance, no insurance. So I will be happy to answer any questions when everyone's done their presentation. I'm sorry if I went so long, but I did it. I enjoyed the topic, and it was a defining experience in my childhood. So thank you very much for being a wonderful audience, and I'll be happy to. I don't see it. Is Jack Gibson in the house? I thought I saw, but at this time, I would like to introduce Jack Gibson, Ocean City High School. City Council member. Would you please welcome Jack Gibson?
Go got his hot. I think my assignment is to go over some of the things that are in the works and have already been instructed to make our town, our area more sustainable in this kind of a storm. We hope it never happens again, but it may. And but before I do that, since I am a survivor, I'd like to just talk a little bit about some of the experience I had. In 1962, I was appointed as acting county engineer. responsible for all the roads and the bridges that got washed out during the storm. So I had a big job ahead of me. I lived with my very young family in a relatively new house across from the VFW. And I can remember planning that house. I'm gonna put 3 courses a block. But then somebody suggested, well, why don't you put biscuit or whatever they call it, a 4-inch, half a course block on it. And I did. And as it turned out, that particular extra 4 inches saved the March storm from coming in on our finished floor and the carpets and everything else there. Like Joe said, we didn't pay much attention to the storm the first day. In fact, I went to work after the first time. But when I came back that night, the storm was, the tide was much higher and it was much worse. And we had some relatively new furniture, and my wife, who was pregnant, by the way, at the time, and my young son, we decided that we should move some of that furniture upstairs so it didn't get damaged in case this storm would continue to come up. And by that time, it was slapping at the floorboards. We could hear it slapping at the floorboard, but it didn't rise to the height to actually come in the floor. Now, we did move a lot of furniture upstairs, and then finally we came to the piano, and that was a little too heavy. We're not gonna do the piano. But anyway, and we all went out in the helicopter, and we all stayed at Dan Libro's house. We all ate all the food that they took from the acme. And I think some of the older guys drank a little bit too much wine, and those toilets that wouldn't work, they were getting sick in those toilets. So it was a welcome place to be with at least electricity, but it was crowded and there was some problems. Anyway, the next day, we went out by helicopter. I stayed out with my family, lived with my mother-in-law in Green Creek while I started to become the county engineer that I was challenged to be. Part of the responsibility was to get several causeways reopened up so that we could get traffic into town, to keep the very good records of what we spent. Even though there was no FEMA until I think somewhere around 78, as Joe said, there was a program where you could get reimbursed for the cost of cleanup and in some cases to replace what we lost. And we did lose the whole road coming into town. As far as, a little bit about resiliency. My parents had a beach raft business that they got back started again for that first summer. They took advantage of a small business administration that was in town that gave us low interest loans, and they built a building that's still there today. I own that building. In those days, you did have to pay it back. It wasn't like COVID where those loans were not required to pay back. But some of the things that you may be interested, especially you new folks that have made investments at CLC. The road, the bridge that you came in on was actually planned before the storm hit. In fact, 3 bridges were planned. One into 34th Street in Ocean City, one into CIL City to replace the old drawbridge, and one into Alabama, all of which had operating drawbridges. And we were trying to get rid of the operators, and so you wouldn't have to have a bridge that opened and closed with the boats. The Ocean City Bridge was under construction. CIL Bridge was just planned. One of the things we did, based on the fact that we washed out the storm, we eliminated one of the curves coming into town. So you can see when the old road goes off to the right, the new road goes through a pair of very shallow curves and then over the new bridge. At the time, CIL was pretty well wiped out, and at least one of the freeholders that are now county commissioners, he questioned whether we should go ahead with the new bridge. And fortunately, the other 4 freeholders at the time overruled him, and in fact, the project proceeded, and you enjoy that bridge today. The road later on, and that bridge was built with a portion of a road for a little over $1 million, and the job was done within less than 2 years. Today, it would take well over 10 years with the environmental permits and so on to do anything like that. And as far as costs, the road was raised by the county, and maybe most of you went through that. It took 4 years trying to maintain traffic with replacing that road. That raising of the road cost $13 million. So prices do rise. But the big thing that's sustainable about what's going on in Sea Isle is we are now eligible and have been eligible for at least 3 phases, the third phase is coming now, to refurbish the sand on the beach. The federal government provides the majority of the money for that. Sea Isle does contribute to it, but it's a relatively small percentage. And every 3 years or so, as we lose some sand, there's a program that lasts for the next 50 years, 9 of which are already gone, to keep that beachfront protected. We did not have that in 1962. In 1962, there were very few bulkheads along the front. There was no promenade, there was no rock jetty, and the tide just came in. But we are far better off, and we were far better off during Sandy because of that beach replenishment program. There's a second study that the Army engineers are doing. It's called the Back Bay Study, because the water can come through the inlets in Strathmere and in TI, and then just flood us from the Back Bay. But over the next many, many years, and I have no idea how long it will take, they have plans to raise the bulkhead elevations, to do some diking, to perhaps even consider tide gates in the inlets to only let so much water through during a period of a storm, such as they have in Holland. I don't know whether that's far-fetched, but it is part of the things they're thinking about. And if they can control the amount of water that gets into the Back Bay, and we can protect ourselves with dikes and higher bulkheads, we can stop the water from coming into Back Bay. We are already succeeding in the ocean front. This would take care of the Back Bay. Well, then that leaves with one other problem. What you've created is sort of like a bathtub where the water is kept out from the bathtub, but it does rain, and you want to get the rainwater out of there. So the city also has plans in place to put in pumping stations. There's 8 phases to the pumping stations that will be required in Sea Isle, and they will not be cheap, and they will not happen overnight. I think the last phase won't occur until 2030. 39th Street has already been finished. The next one is 46th Street, and it goes into other phases that the city's planning to do. Anyway, I haven't referred to my notes. I know it's going to be a long afternoon, so other than that, I'll be around and available. I'm very happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
We're going to get into the story section. We're going to lead with a couple of dramatic stories, and then we're going to open it up to the general population. And we thank you all for your patience, and thank you again everyone for coming. It's quite an event for all of us, and it helps us even to just tell the story from here out. Come on, Diana. Waiting for you.
Okay, yes, I'm a survivor. Lived in Seattle all my life. My mother was born here, so that tells you how long the family's been here. The storm, very memorable. We were young married. I had 2 children, a boy, 4 years old, and an infant child. Thank you. That wasn't smart enough to break it. An infant child, 4 months old. We lived in an apartment above a garage, which was very common in those days. They built a garage and put an apartment upstairs, had a rental system. And we lived on 41st Street up Pleasure Avenue. The apartment itself had a large picture window on the side of it, which you could see all over 41st Street. And actually, it was right across the street from where Henry's backyard is now. So I had a far view straight up to the boardwalk, where I could see the Madeleine Theater, which was a movie theater on the boardwalk. Of course, it's no longer there. There was also a fishing pier attached to it. The first day, they had predicted heavy rain, perhaps some snow. We got up, there was some flooding, but nothing much at that point in time. And my husband had to go to work, but found out he wasn't going to need to go in because it was too flooded to get there. Earlier in the afternoon, the storm subsided, and so some of the water began to recede. So we decided, let's go see what's going on. At that time, we could still walk through what little water was left. We went up to the boardwalk. There were other people up there looking around. But we were saddened to see that the Madeleine Theater building, the back end of it, was already completely torn in half. As I said, the sun came out again, so we went on home. By this time, it gets to be dinner time. But we did hear that the storm was going to come back again. We thought it was over at that point, but it wasn't. And we also met my father up there, who was he had a popcorn stand inside the movie theater building, and he was trying to salvage his popcorn machine to no avail. As I said, we went back home. By this time, it's getting close to dinner time, getting dark, and we ended up without power. And without power, we had no TV. We didn't have a stove because there was an electric stove in this apartment. So the menu for that night was sandwiches. As it got a little later, the next thing we knew, we lost power. Well, that was pretty devastating because there was our heat, our stove, and whatever else. During all this time, the noise was horrendous. The wind was overbearing. You could hear it constantly. But since it was dark, there wasn't a TV, no electric. I think we used candles a little bit. And so we wrapped the kids up, put them to bed, and we all went to bed. Anyway, during the night, the baby woke up and we couldn't get her settled. I had gloves on her, everything else, her hands were ice cold. Tried to feed her. She was happy to be fed, but at the same time, she refused it. I thought this is very strange. So we tried that all over again. Finally, we thought it was suggested, take the milk out, put it in a pot, heat it over the candle. We did. It worked. She was happy little baby. That's a very emotional part of my story. The next morning when we got up early, from this picture window, the view was absolutely amazing and devastating. The street was completely flooded. Very high water. I've never seen water that high and see high before. Hope we never do again. But along with all the high water, there was constant debris floating by. Lumber, chairs, beach benches, steps whole layers of steps floating by the street. And as I said before about the Magdalene Theater, I could see it from where we were living to the boardwalk, only because there weren't many of the taller buildings like there are now. I could see the facade of the Magdalene movie, beautiful concrete coated building, fancy ornaments, etc. And we could see that from the apartment. But as time went on and the debris kept continuing to flow past the street, all of a sudden I noticed the side of the facade was tilting. And we watched more debris. The side was tilting a little more until finally it was completely gone. To stand there and watch that building go down was one of the most eerie feelings I have ever had. And it did belong to my grandfather, so it was also family related. So the building was gone. You could see the emptiness, and I knew things were bad at that time. Well, at that point, let's go, Bill, let's get out of here. We gotta get out of here. We had parked our car at the plaza lot, which is now the bank parking lot. So it was on a little bit higher ground where it would be safe. So we packed up what we could. We headed out to go pick up the car. I don't know what I was thinking, but so all I wanted to do was get out and get these kids with me. We got to the car and gratefully it started. So we headed down Pleasure Avenue through the water and the debris. Like I said, I don't know what I was thinking. Every street we tried to turn down to go to the bridge, which was also completely flooded and also filled with debris. So we passed 45th Street, 44th, because we couldn't get down to the bridge. Then we passed 45th, 46th, 47th. We got stalled. So what do we do now? We finally had to get out of the car. Bill had some friends, the Miller family, that lived on 47th Street. And we thought, well, let's take a chance, we'll go there. I had the baby, the water was up beyond my knees. My husband had the Billy, carried him, and we trudged through the water. Yes, the water was cold and very, trying to keep the kids up high enough so they didn't get wet. Fortunately, when we reached the Villas house, knocked on the door, had to go into more water. They were gracious enough to have us come in, and they had electricity. They had heat. They were very welcoming to us, graciously let us stay there. We were there for like 2 or 3 days. I'm not sure how many. But speaking about the hospital, Miller's son and his wife had just had a baby. They were rounded up and evacuated. So we stayed there, I'm not sure, but maybe 2 days. Next morning, who comes trooping through the back door but my mother, dressed in knit boots and a raincoat. And she was trying to look for a place to go. She went to her friends, the boys, but they weren't there. So she stayed with us. The TVs worked at Miller's because they did have electricity. So we did get to watch some TV, but they didn't know too much about what was going on here since they didn't have any communication. So, well, I guess it was, I'm not sure how many days, but we finally got news that something was going to pick us up and take us to a helicopter and take us out of town to Ocean View. That finally happened. and we were to get ready for the bus to come at any time. Now, my mother was someone that did not like to leave town after a period of time. She liked being here and didn't want to have to go anywhere. So we had to convince her to come with us. It took a lot of convincing, but she knew I had the 2 children and was concerned about them and knew that I would need some help with them. Eventually the bus came. This was a long time. It's when you're waiting for a bus to come to pick you up. You go get a helicopter. It didn't just happen quickly. That came, and my mother was convinced to go with us. We got to the bus took us, I think, wherever they said, and we boarded the helicopter, and my mother went with us, and we had the baby, and some other people were in the helicopter. In the meantime, the baby didn't like noise, so there she is crying. Face beat red, couldn't hear a sound except the helicopter. She did not like that. We landed in Ocean View. They had a checkup for all the incoming survivors. And we called our cousin Nancy Bruin, who lived in Ocean View at the time. And when we got there, we were able to call my husband's parents, who lived in Philadelphia. So they came down to rescue us when they were able to get here. Nancy had pretty much all the BRCA, Tracy, Dalrymple, et cetera, family there. Like Joe was talking about 60 people at Lee Rose, I think Nancy had as many people there also. Bill's father came down and picked us up, and we went to Philadelphia and stayed there until we were allowed back into town, because they had to get the water straightened out and clean everything up. So, funny story, but not funny. Because there wasn't any communication between the areas, my father did not know where my mother was. And he went through a couple of agonizing days until messages got through to him, because he stayed in town, would not leave without her. And finally got a message from Bruins that Jeanette was out there with them. So we should have had cell phones, but we didn't. Other than that, once we were in Philadelphia for, as I said, maybe about 2 weeks. And then we were really able to come back home. We were all glad to get back home.
Before we open this up to everybody, I would just like all of us to put our hands together and give a round of applause to Caitlin and Pat Hackett.
It wasn't my idea, Caitlin made me do it. You will notice in the storm stories, mine as well as the others that you'll be hearing, there are little themes, you've seen them already. People helping one another, people moving from one spot to another spot, and all kinds of serendipitous things like what happened with Diana's parents. So my story fits the mold because there's a lot of things that happened that are, pretty consistent. And it starts as you're a kid and you wake up. We always got cheated in these snowstorms in Philadelphia, closed down the schools. See how we never got the snow, we had to come to school. However, we woke up and we were going to get a day off from school. Both schools were flooded, so we got to stay home. Things were looking up, and things only got better because my father, we had heat, we had electricity, and we had a front row seat for this storm. We were right on the beach at 50th Street, 5006 Marine Place, which is what they call the road, which is really now where the promenade is. So my cousins, and my aunt and uncle, and my grandparents, everybody was coming over. And so it was only getting better, until it wasn't. So we were all in the structure. My structure, it was an old boarding house, an old rooming house. My father had carved out an apartment in it for our family. So we all were gathered there, and you could notice that things were progressing and they weren't, going in the right direction. Another theme of the storm, and Diana touched on it, was the noise. It was the howling wind and debris, and porches were breaking off from structures, or structures were being destroyed, and the debris is floating into other buildings, plus the howling wind and the rain. So it's very noisy. A little bit earlier in the evening, we had a dog, and it had to go out to do its business, so we put the dog out, and now the dog never comes back. So my father has these whining kids, what happened to Russell? And of course, he's trying to play defense, and he says, animals have survival instincts. They're not like people. They know what they're doing. They are really on top of things. That dog, he's out there, so he knows what he's doing. He headed for higher ground. Don't you worry about that dog. We're looking out the window.
No higher ground.
Yeah, there's no higher ground. Surrounded. So he was distracted. Meanwhile, things were happening. We had French doors down in our lobby of the hotel, and the waves broke through and they smashed the doors open, and now the lobby was being flooded by the waves. And then my uncle and my father, they went down, and my brother Joe, he was 17, went down, try to nail it shut with and try to keep the water at bay. The water was hitting the bulkhead. We had a big picture window. When I say big, this was like 6 feet high and maybe 8 to 10 feet wide. And it was right looking down from the second floor, which is the first floor of our apartment, looking down on the ocean. And while it was light out, you could actually see the waves smash in, and they would come over the top of the bulkhead, and they would wash the fill out that was behind. And it washed it out, and then it started to break through the bulkhead, and it would start to splinter. And as the thing progressed, as the tide kept coming and the surge, and the waves seemed to be bigger, and there's more waves, because remember, we're getting towards the high tide, it would run underneath the building, and every time a wave breached or knocked through eventually the bulkhead, it would come underneath, and the whole building would shake. And it was terrifying. You're little kids, and but then dads, don't worry, everything's until it wasn't. So it was right around dinner time. They're going to feed the kids. So I was out in the kitchen with my mom. My brother Mark was over there. Mark was in at that picture window with my grandfather, and they were watching the action unfold. And all of a sudden, what had happened? In the old days, nowadays, when you are up on the beach and you drive timber piles, what they call it, jet them in. They use water to force the sand out of the way so you can get down below scouring. Back then, it was cedar piles just driven to refusal. So what had happened is they had scoured out around the pilings in the front of the building. And all of a sudden, the building lurched forward while we were all in it on a 15-degree angle. The lights went out. Everyone's thrown to the ground. Mark and my grandfather are in the living room. The picture window explodes because when the house settles, your windows and your doors, and everyone is thrown to the floor. This is when my father revealed the detailed, well thought out evacuation plan. Right. Actually, for those of you who knew my father was a very calm, cool, collected guy. He had 6 children, 4 boys. He never raised his voice, but it was chilling when he got up, and everybody, you don't know what to do, you're shaking. The kitchen, I was in the kitchen, all, you remember the scene for the Titanic?
Oh my.
All of the cabinets opened up with that.
Yeah.
And
Dishes
plates
all-
and dishes and glasses, everything's flying out.
Right.
Things are crashing and breaking. And my father gets up off the ground and he says, Helen, take the children and run. So that was the evacuation plan. Run for their lives. Now, my brother Mark and my cousin Michael. You know how there's kids in every family, you know, when your parents tell you to do something, it's probably just a suggestion. If they really want us to do it, they'll say it a second time, and then they'll raise their voice the third time, and then we'll have to do it. Not this time. Mark and Michael led the way, and they ran out first, and they got to, we had recently just built steps on the backside of the house, which is a blessing, because we would have otherwise had to go down through the building where the waves were breaking through. So they went out the back step and down the back step, the door was jammed, and Michael threw himself into the door flies open, the wind catches it, it smashes, Mark's right behind. My mother entrusted me, I was 10 days short of my 13th birthday on this, March 6th, and she said, take care, I have my brother, he was 6 years old, my cousin Jan was only 3 years younger than me, but she was short of, you know, so there, and then she had a dog, Tubber. So now we have a dog and we're all, and the water is freezing, although it's interesting, I've talked to Jan, I talked to Mark, even my brother Greg when he was alive, and no one can remember because the adrenaline was just flowing and you're scared to death, you know?
Right.
You know, so we waited, and my mother said, go the back way, go cut through the yards, jump the fences. In other words, the way the kids, because we are friends with the Bednareks, and they were on 51st Street, one house in from Pleasure, and third house from the beach. So we cut through there and we went into, so I got there, it took us a little longer to get there because it was the three of us, it was up to my waist, but it was up to my brother's chest, Jan, you know, it was like almost up to her chest.
And cold.
And it was cold, and it was freezing, so then we have to, when we get to the fences, we're gonna climb over, pass my brother over, Jan help her over, somebody held the dog, it was, we get over to the Bednarek's house, we knock on the door opens, and among the greeting party, Russell the dog. So I was almost 13 years of age, and at this point, you know, you start to put things together, and the esteem level for Russell was going way up. He did know what to do. Screw them, I'm getting out of Dodge. There's a light on. Meanwhile, the esteem level for my father was going in the opposite direction. Let's invite the whole family over for the storm, we can all die together. So, but fortunately, and then we waited. It was very nerve-wracking. I don't know if Andy's here, but I was in, you know, I'm joking, I'm making light of it, but I lost it. I started to cry. I banged my head again. I said, I don't know what's with the banging my head. I banged my head
We did it.
on the wall. I don't know why, but it was just,
Yeah.
I was feeling pain, and no, I was feeling pain inside and out. So at any rate, Rainey Bednarek, sweetheart, God rest her soul, and she came right over, hugged me, comforted me. Meanwhile, my mother's trying to make the way with my grandmother. So it's my mother, my Aunt Jean, my godmother, and my grandmother. And she tells a funny story. As they're walking, they're trying to walk, they have to go the long way, parallel to they cut through Delaney's, but there was a path there, but you know, they're still much closer to the storm surge than we are. And my grandmother gets to a telephone pole and she wraps her arms around it. And she says to her two sister-in-laws, save yourselves, I'm old. So it's my mother, they both peeled her hands away. No mother, we're all going together. And then they arrived at Derek's house. I'm going to spare you, because we have so many people that need to speak. I'll just say we went, and this is part of the themes that happened. We were evacuated the next day because we were worried about what's going to go next. Our house, we did get up in the morning, we were in the front bedroom on 51st, we ran to the back bedroom. Andy took us, led us into his parents' bedroom. We look out, and the little kids would cheer, yeah, because the building was still standing. How it was, on this little 50-degree angle. So then we were evacuated. My father came in the flatbed. You could get with a dump truck or something higher if you avoided the low spots. And Pleasure Avenue was close to the storm surge, but it was always, it's still to this day, it's pretty high. And we went to Lewis's funeral home. We were there for a couple of days. All the problems, food, little food, which he's feeding us. Bathrooms. Fortunately, they had an extra bathroom because it was a funeral home. So however, we soon, young children, right? It wasn't long before that wasn't functioning very well. And then we were evacuated down to the VFW, where we got our helicopter ride. And my lasting memory of going out on the helicopter was looking down, and one of the buses that had stalled out, I think only one made it. After that one stalled, they didn't try with the other one, was just the roof of the bus. It looked like a gigantic orange surfboard as we went out, as they looked down. And like I say, the metal land, there was no metal. You know how no matter how high the water is, at least where the railroad line is, where the cedar, that's south side. Nothing, it was a sea of water. So I'm now going to turn it over to anyone who would like to come up and share their storm stories. Eva Feely.
Thank you, Pat. Meanwhile, while all this drama and comedy was unfolding in Seattle, there were those of us in the separate town of Townsend's Inlet, I'm glad you pointed that out, Joe, who were surviving in our own way. We were cut off basically from a lot of what was going on in the center of town. We only heard about it after the fact. We were extremely isolated where we were. The story of our family is that my father built a house on the northeast corner of 93rd and Landis in 1956. And we lived very happily and uneventfully there until 62. We decided very early on in the day that we were going to evacuate. But as was pointed out earlier, for a brief period during the afternoon, things looked like it was clearing up a little bit. And my dad, who lollygagged anyway and had to check and recheck everything 20 times, would just drag his feet. And I would say it was late afternoon, maybe 4 o'clock, by the time we finally got on the road. We waved goodbye to our pathetic neighbor. It was the saddest thing. She was a young wife and mom with an infant. Her husband was a Coast Guard, of course, due to the circumstances. He was on duty that day. We could not fit her in our car with all of, a family of 6 and all of our stuff. So we had to wave goodbye to her and hope for the best. So my dad did what people still do to this day when it's flooded in town. We took Pleasure. Pleasure is the way you go because it's the highest road in town. We made it to about 60th Street, I'm just guessing, when a wave crashed through the dunes to our right and broke right on top of our car. Looking down Pleasure Avenue, we could see that the same was happening as far as we could see. The dunes which were quite high at that time, they were tremendous protection, were being breached. We had no choice but to turn around and go home. So I mention the location because we were spared the devastation other people suffered, because that part of Townsend's Inlet is one of the highest parts of the island. So all through that terrible night, and that first night was the most terrifying time. Of course, when we went home, we brought our neighbor with us, her baby. My mother had the foresight to cook some chicken in the oven before we lost our power and our water and our heat. We watched the water come up right up to our porch, but it never came in. We too had a big picture window looking out over the bay. Townsend's Inlet at that point is only 2 blocks long. And although we were in a vulnerable position there right at the inlet, we fared so well, as I said, because of the height of our lot. So every place we looked was just water, as many have said before. And I remember thinking, this must be what it's like to be on a cruise ship. Because all you could see was water. We were the last house on the island on our side of Landis. There weren't any houses across the street. And in those days, there were dunes, there was high grass there. People used to take a shortcut to the inlet from there. All of those dunes went down, so we had a clear view straight through to Avalon. And we could see 2 or 3 fires blazing in Avalon, and it lit up the whole night sky, and it was utter devastation. It was truly terrifying. So after that first harrowing night, I don't remember much about the next day until again in late afternoon, the Coast Guard came by boat to pick us up and took us to the station at 82nd Street. We brought our blankets and pillows with us. And there's comfort in numbers, there's comfort in company and seeing familiar faces. And after having been so isolated, there weren't many people that lived down at that end at the time. We've spotted a few of our friends from school and started exchanging horror stories about what we had been through the night before. The third morning, we were brought back to our house just to gather up a few things, a few essentials. I don't even remember a suitcase. I remember my mom throwing some things into Acme bags. And I guess we were boated back to where the helicopter took off from 82nd Street from the Coast Guard station. And we were flown over the bay to Ocean View. I remember there being reporters and cameramen from Philadelphia news stations there. Also, I remember, and I was so happy to see them, my grandparents had come for us. So we looked like refugees for sure. We were a family of 6. The kids ranged in age from myself, who was 12, to my sister Joan, who was only 1, in my mother's arms, carrying everything we had in a couple paper bags. So what I wanted to stress, aside from the fact that things were a little bit different on that end of the island, were that it was really a life-changing event for our family, because unlike many of the families, we did not come back. My father was spooked entirely. He said, we'll keep it as a summer house, but we won't live there anymore in the winter. Now, we eventually did, but not for many years after that. It was very disruptive, of course, to the kids, because we went from being in school one day to having to enroll in another school in Philadelphia the following week. We did return one weekend when property owners were allowed back on the island just to check on the house. My brother and I took a walk around what used to be our neighborhood. Everything was leveled. Richard and I were astonished, my brother Richard and I, the 2 oldest, to see that the in-ground pool from the Polaris Motel, which was on 93rd and Beach, had lifted up and floated down the street And there it was, sitting right on 93rd Street near our house. And my brother's favorite find was a set of false teeth. We've also made it down as far as the beach, as close as we could get. Now, in those days, there were very nice dunes, but there were gentle paths that made it easy to get onto the beach. Well, now it was a cliff, a tall cliff. There was no way to make it on the beach in our area. So the summer of '62 was spent restoring the outside of the property. It reminded me a lot when Superstorm Sandy came around and everybody came down to check on their houses and throw things out that had been destroyed. And you walked up and down the street talking to your neighbors and finding out how they fared. That's how it was that summer. All the summer people that came wanted to know what we had been through. And eventually we settled into a new kind of normalcy. So that's my story, but I just want to end by saying that terrible storm didn't scare me enough to keep me away from Seattle. My husband JB and I, who used to summer here on 50th Street, we settled here after we were married, and we've been happily living the island life for 51 years now. So thank you.
So if there's anyone else has a story, let's start.
Good afternoon. My name is Wayne McMurray. I'm a third generation McMurray family. We live on top of the Creighton's hardware store. Saw the tide come in and no power. My father was a sea captain, Captain Jack. He had some anchor line laying around the house, tied it around me and lowered me through the heat grate into the hardware store. Get batteries, sterno, and some charcoal. And we made it through the storm. During the storm, my father went across the street to the drugstore and carried the Rubenstein family and kids and mother over to our house and took a helicopter ride later on that day. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know it's running long, but if anybody else has anything, we'd love to hear from you. Ken, thank you very much. And you're more than welcome to have, yes. Come forward. I recognize that face. I don't have a name, but I got the face. Oh, you, yes. And they all look alike, that's the other.
My name is Valerie, and my maiden name was Bucher. My father was a builder developer on the island. I was in grade school at the time, and we lived at 3210 Landis Avenue, which was across from the lighthouse. And it flooded there all the time. The first day of the storm, my mother was cooking a pot roast, and the water started to come up and breach the front porch. It was up about this high, and we saw houses floating down, going into the bay, going across the street. We actually, when we came back, there was a house on our front lawn. Our house had 3.5 feet of water inside it. We had a dining room table that could not fit through a doorway without being taken apart, and that was undamaged in a kitchen from the living room. So it floated in there somehow or another, means damage, water damage, but we could not get it through. It had to be taken apart to come out of there. And on the first day, I tried to go down as a child and a big child, but a child. I tried to rescue a cat floating down on the top of a roof. And the water, as everyone stated, was freezing. I was waist deep into it, and the current was going 90 miles an hour. And I felt was my father grabbed the back of me and hauled me out of the water and told me that the cat would survive. They knew how to survive, and that was it. We had to leave, we had a boat come up and get us, that afternoon at the height because the water was coming in the house. I guess we still had phone service because my father had called for somebody. And he was out going around the island in his waiter boots. And he had a flatbed, and he's one of the ones that raided the Acme, broke the doors down and fed everybody on the island. Because we were here for 3 days, but the first night we went over, he went along with the police officer, chief of police, Joe Petaluga. And we went over to Joe Petaluga's house on the bay, on 44th in the bay, for that first night, and the winds were so bad, the house was almost falling down. The next day, we went to Furley's on 53rd, and we spent 2 days at Furley's house. And like I said, my father raided the Acme and fed everybody on the island, and rescued people that houses were collapsing. And it was a real mess. And then we went out by helicopter on the third day, as everyone else did, because our bridge was totally washed out. So there was no way, and they couldn't go to the other islands. Everything was just a mess. We lost, I guess everyone stated this, at least 1 or 2 houses to the beach that were beachfront houses, which then made Andy Benara's house almost beachfront because he was the third one back. And everything is from our childhood, all the big excursion houses and all the houses on the boardwalk that you'd see from the 1800s that are in all these pictures of old Sea Isle, which was like Atlantic City in the 1800s and early 1900s. They were all destroyed, and we knew them all as kids. It was great. And movie theater, the Madeline movie theater going down, and her husband worked for my dad. So, right? Yeah. And in fact, she was always at my house. She knows the dining room table that floated into the living room. And that's about all I wanted to say, was that it was really a life experience, which I hope none of us are ever experience again here, but it was something on the island. And then my father was one of the head people to reconstruct the island, and worked with the Army Corps of Engineers to build the promenade. He had all the big boulders come down from Vermont and New Hampshire, and behind that, what you're seeing underneath the macadam and the bulkhead is all big boulders, then concreted in, and then behind that, further down the dunes, is all geothermal filled with sand tubes, and then the sand dunes were built up over them. I see a lot of faces, Afghanis and everybody. I see a lot of people that I know from childhood, but it was an experience we all lived through. Okay, that's all I got to say.
Thank you.
If there's anyone else? Bud? Okay, all right. Well, yes, come on, Ben. As Joe pointed out, this community's revival had a lot to do with his father's efforts. We brought everybody together and saw it. We kept the community together.
Hi, folks, Vince Lamana. My dad was mayor at this time during the storm. My exposure to the storm was I was at college at the time, senior year. And I heard about it. I decided I better come back home and see what's going on. I unfortunately came too late for the helicopter rides. They were trucking people in, including me, from Canuso's gas station, which was out on Route 9 outside of Sea Isle. And when I arrived, my parents had a home at 144th Street. The real estate office was on the first floor. They lived on the second. And when I got there, the Army Corps of Engineers had bivouacked the first floor, and they had their personnel in there. They were running all of their projects from there, and I was getting in the way. But and then, of course, my dad, tech helper. Then my dad spent the rest of his term really responding to the issues. They had the emergency issues first, and then after that, rebuilding of the town. And the rest of his term was pretty much dedicated to that. He had a lot of cooperation from a lot of people. As mentioned earlier, a lot of the veterans stepped up, and it was a community effort. And it's nice to be here today to talk about it. And it's nice that everybody responded. I want to really thank Pat and the museum for having this function. Hopefully, maybe it'll become an annual event, but thank you again. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, almost. Just so you know, there was a couple of things were left unsaid, and there was just so much to say. But I just want you to realize what they did with all the debris. Now you have the boardwalk, you have all the buildings, you have just tons and tons and cubic yards of debris that doesn't belong. Okay, so step one of getting Seal cleaned up was getting rid of the debris. Well, how are you going to get rid of the debris?
Burn.
So what they did is they went to the far end of the island where no one was anymore, and they started a fire.
Right.
Now they started this fire so out of civilization that it didn't matter because the fire actually burned well into May. Okay, that's it. So where the football field is now is where the fire was. Okay, and they had just passed a no open fire law in New Jersey. Commissioner Gardner was overheard by one of my sources saying, "I don't care,
Right.
burn it."
That's right.
And they were in violation the whole time. But 24 hours a day, that fire burned, and from sun up to sundown, equipment trucked debris there.
Mhm.
And I can find no record of the state ever pursuing it.
That's correct.
That's where all that came from. So if you're wondering where all the debris and everything went, that's where it went. So thank you. Pat?
I think that's a wrap. Unless
Thank
there's
you all for
anyone else.
attending. That's the man right there. Remember what I said, if you saw someone who's a survivor, go talk to them, because they have stories. And after the event, we can you caught the emotion some of us had in telling it 62 years later, it's real. But we can make light of it kind of now, so ask them to talk to that.